The Omen trilogy is a box set I got very early on in my Blu-ray or movie collecting habit, adventure, lifestyle, whatever you want to call it. The Omen being one of those horror classics, and I remember liking the 6606 Omen back around when it came out in theaters, somewhere around, I think that might have been 2006. I know buying the set, I wasn't really that interested in the Omen sequels, and I would probably never watch them, but I think this set was around like 14 or 15 bucks back in the day, and it came with the two that I had seen and liked, so I was fine with it. But of course, one of the Omen sequels would get their number drawn, so I feel like it might be a good time to revisit the Omen and also burn through this box set.
I think the girls with their nails done now.
It had been years since the last time I watched this. I know I watched the 06 remake before watching this one because I didn't see this one until around the time I started college or somewhere around there. I can't remember if the first time I watched this was when I bought the box set or if I had watched it beforehand like on streaming or something, but regardless, it's been a while.
It's been a while.
The film is about Robert and his wife at the night of their child's birth when Robert is told their child died during birth. A priest offers up another baby that was orphaned that night to replace Robert's baby, and he decides to go along with it, not telling his wife. 5 years later, and mysterious events start happening in Robert's perfect picture life because, well, spoilers. I think for any film that I do, like it's a part of a series or a trilogy that's kind of lumped with sequels, I'm gonna have to spoil movies a little bit to talk about the sequels in the franchise. So spoiler warning, but Damien, their son, is actually the Antichrist. Now, what I really like about this setup is that the film, for a while, plays with the idea whether or not the kid is indeed the seed of Satan, which makes for some interesting character decisions, and that kind of makes the film really engaging. The first scare of the movie at the birthday party is honestly like one of the best moments in horror in my opinion. It's so early in the film, but it's so brutal and so out of nowhere that it really shocks you as much as the party goers themselves. Not to mention that, but it also casts this weird tone around the kid and the family. It's disturbing and well executed, and honestly it's one of those few scenes that's kind of stuck with me for all this time, and I can now see why revisiting it. The film doesn't really waste any time. From the moment the film starts, you're thrust into the death of a child, the emotional turmoil of the lead character that puts you right on the edge of your seat, and I'd say for the first 45 minutes it never really lets you go. You spend time with characters getting to know them, but you also get some really creepy and unnerving things happening around them. What's shown on screen is purposeful, there's foreshadowing in the background of the framing, little nuggets of information with payoffs in the background. You can see how characters react to things and everything feels natural and logical through how the characters handle certain situations. Kind of just speaks volumes on their character and personality. You're organically learning about them without exposition or insistence. However, after that 45 minutes or so, basically when the mom winds up in the hospital and Robert meets up with a photographer Lupin, the film turns into almost a mystery adventure, and that's where it kind of started to lose me. You have a really tight first act with a strong opener to a second act when the film kind of just takes away the mystery of what Damien really is. It's where the film just kind of starts to fall apart for me. It not only feels slower in the way information is presented, but also less interesting because you don't really have that aura of mystique that it had before. Sure, there's some good moments here and there to get you to the end of the film, but it's much more forgettable than the opening. I will say the music is absolutely great in the film, and it did win an Oscar for it. Well deserved for sure. Not only is it just great pieces of music, but it also fits the scene so well that it's in that it elevated them and the emotion of the scene without completely carrying the scene either. Great stuff. Most of the time the effects look great, but there are some moments where there's some like bad priest makeup. For one, there's a scene with baboons at a safari that was really impressive. The cinematography is great. There's a lot of details to pay attention to in the frame. It's just that the back end of the film really dragged for me. Honestly, coming back, I was wondering how this film would have been for me, if it would have held up or not. Typically, I'm not a fan of paranormal-esque kind of things when it comes to horror. It's just not my jam, but there is a real sense for a while of being really grounded that just hooked me in. I guess according to the trivia, there was going to be a more supernatural scene, some more like supernatural cutaways, and I'm glad they decided not to go that route because it just worked better for me to have a more grounded sense of what's going on. Overall though, I'm giving this film a 7 out of 10. The first half being closer to like a 9, with the back end closer to a 5, so kind of evens out at like 7. It's just really kind of petered out for me at the end, but still solid, still good watch, still worth a watch, and yeah, it definitely holds up over the years. 7 out of 10.
Go crazy, berserker.
Now we are charting into unknown territory with Damien Omen II from 1978. This film is a direct sequel to the first Omen, taking place 7 years later, as Damien is now a 13-year-old living with his uncle. The uncle owns a large company that works with pesticides, chemicals, and growing food. Damien begins to learn about his true history and being the son of Satan, while the film just kind of rehashes the original, like almost to a T in a way. Honestly, it's pretty middling. I will say that it does indeed look like a proper sequel. There's a lot of horror movies out there where the sequels just kind of look like they're made for straight to video or something. That's not really the case here. It looks like a full-fledged sequel. The problem is, we not only just do the same thing as the first film, but we also spend most of the time in the area that I enjoyed less of the first film, which is just Damien being the Antichrist. It's so much less interesting. It's the mystery that worked well with the first film for me, and while there's some of that here, we the audience know better, and it's much less of the film. The film early on tells you that yes, he is indeed the Antichrist, and yes, this is really happening. From there, the film doesn't do much to stand out, but it doesn't really do much bad either. The boy who plays Damien does look like an older version of the kid from the first film, and honestly, the time we spend with him learning about potentially being the Antichrist is by far the best parts of the film. The unfortunate part is that it's kind of barely in the film. The film spends most of the time with his uncle and aunt as they kind of do the same thing as the parents of the first film. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. If the film would have leaned more into Damien discovering his true self, it could have been so much more interesting, like a satanic coming of age story. That would have been cool. The music isn't really as good either. A lot of it just feels like a rehash of the first film or just kind of generic. Gary Goldsmith, who did the first film score, was labeled uncredited here as a score producer, so I'm not really sure how much involvement he had with this film, but regardless, it's definitely not as strong. This is just one of those movies that's kind of hard to talk about because it's just so down the middle. Some things are interesting, but most of the film is just forgettable. The thing with the first Omen is that the ending leaves you guessing what will happen with Damien and the world. We don't really need to know what happens with Damien and the world. It kind of feels like this film and probably the sequel that comes up next kind of undermines the ending of the first movie, but I honestly just don't have much more to say about this one. It doesn't really stand out, and it's just a 5 out of 10. It's a 5 out of 10.
Monster inside of me, you better watch out if you ignite me's a road ahead of full prophecy to be the greatest beast the world has ever seen.
The last of the sequels in this box set, The Final Conflict, or Omen 3, The Final Conflict, or Omen 3, or whatever the title of this movie is, was released in 1981, and this third installment follows an adult Damien as he is appointed as a diplomat in England. Now fully aware that he is the Antichrist and diving emo headfirst into it.
Infuse in him the grandeur of melancholy, the divinity of loneliness, the purity of evil, the paradise of pain.
Where are you?
While he's trying to rise to power, there's a subset of priests trying to take him down, and the birth or second coming of Jesus Christ. Holy moly, was this one rough. First off, I don't understand the priests in this one, like, at all. They all just come after Damien one by one, but according to the first film, you need to kill him in a certain way with all the daggers, and that's just kind of like scrapped here. But nothing else that's like in the continuity is really scrapped. It's just kind of this point just feels forgotten or ignored for some weird reason. It was kind of a point throughout the entire film that just kept distracting me. Like, don't make rules and not follow them. This time around, Sam Neill plays Damien, and he is without a doubt the best part of the film, even though he doesn't really look like the other Damiens. He just gives a solid performance, even if I find most of the dialogue to be really super cringe and goofy.
We were both created in man's image. While you were born of an impotent God, I was conceived of a jackal.
Like, at this point in the film, we're only doing the thing that isn't interesting at all with Damien, which is Damien knowing that he's like Lars von Trier. Like, we get it, you're edgy. It's so boring, and there's just nothing to play off of it. The whole priest hit squad angle goes absolutely nowhere. Like, they don't do anything interesting. They just basically show up at different times and get murked. There's no conflict here. The plot twist of the second coming of Jesus was easy to call from the beginning. Like, I don't want to spoil the ending of the film, but we have spent now 3 movies moving along with this character, and the ending just felt so underwhelming to conclude with. The music isn't as good, a lot of it feels like stock music and very generic. There's really no scenes in the film that stand out. The 666 scar on Damien's head looked really super goofy, but there's something weird happening with the film. I'm not sure if it's just we started the movie with dinner and was eating for the first part of the film, but it didn't really drag on. Honestly, even with my complaints on the first film and this pacing, none of the 3 films from the original trilogy really felt like they dragged on despite a lot of the problems I've had with them. Like, yeah, without a doubt, the final conflict is the worst of the trilogy. There's not much to like about the film, and it's the one that I'm easily going to forget about, but I remember my wife saying, we're already an hour and 10 minutes into this, and I was surprised at well. But with that being said, it's still a 3 out of 10, dog. It's still a 3 out of 10. Yeah, it exists.
Since the hour you vomited forth from the gaping wound of a woman, you've done nothing but drown man's soaring desires in a deluge of sanctimonious morality.
Now we move on to the remake of the original 76 film, and the last film of this box set. Finally, The Omen was released in 2006, or June 6th, 2006. Get it? Did you get it? 6606?
Antichrist. 666 in Hebrew, bottoms up. And the double laughs.
The first film was also released June 6, 1976, so that's kind of fun, I guess. This is one, though, that I've always kind of said was kind of on par with the original for memory, and wow, was I wrong. Because this sucked.
Terrible! Horrendous! I'm offended! I'm appalled!
It was such a drag to sit through. I just said the original trilogy wasn't hard to sit through and it moved along pretty nicely, but my god was this one hard to sit through. Maybe it was the fact we watched all 4 of these movies in one day, but I think it's more because I had the original film in memory to compare this to, and it does not hold up. The film is so much slower, but feels like it's just going through Omen checklists. Like, yeah, it's slower feeling, but also it feels like it's skipping around a lot faster. It's really weird. It tries to do some new things, but doesn't do anything to develop them or justify why they're doing new things or why they're here. It's like they took some aspects of Omen 3 to kind of mix into here, and it just didn't work. The story is literally the same as the original, minus a few little tweaks. But so much so that apparently the writer Damien McDermott wasn't allowed credit by the Screenwriters Guild, giving sole credit to David Seltzer, who apparently had nothing to do with writing this film, which is kind of hilarious, but could also be frustrating to David Seltzer for technically having a full writing credit on this absolute garbage. In the first film, we spent like every ounce of time learning about these characters. They're deep and rich characters that make rational decisions, and it's not the case here. We spend so much more time not doing anything, just trying to get from point A to point C, while the characters make some irrational choices and forgetting point B all along. Like the mom is just straight up an this movie for no reason.
Could you please take him out of here?
He's playing quietly, Kate.
I said, take him out of here.
Even the way the film opens, I think, just shows you what you're in for. The original film throws you right in, while the remake spends time going over information that just isn't necessary. I know I've said this a bunch already, but what worked so well in the first part of the first film was trying to figure out if Damien was indeed the Antichrist. This film pretty much just starts off by telling you that, yeah, he's the Antichrist, and the mother, on a dime, just starts to hate the child, like instantly, unlike the first film. And oh my god, I just hate the look of this film as well. That air quotation horror color grading. There's just nothing interesting happening here in frame. Shots don't really feel purposeful. Camera movement or framing doesn't feel purposeful, but rather, did we get the shot? All right, let's move on. There's no identity with the remake other than the original film. The music that's such a standout in the original is just void here. This has to be the most generic score. It's so underwhelming. I couldn't even tell you what instruments were used in the music, and I just finished watching the thing. The actor who plays Damien is really bad, like really bad. Like, sure, the boy in the first film wasn't great either, but he didn't stand out as distractingly bad. Every time Oliver Tree is on screen, I could not buy him as the Antichrist.
They see me tizzing, they hate it. Knock knock, who's there? Autism. Burn, burn, burn.
I do like the fact that the photographer in the first film I kind of thought looked like David Thewlis. In the remake, they actually got David Thewlis to play the photographer, which I just found hilarious. There's also a moment with a dog at the beginning of the film that isn't a Rottweiler, and it's the only time in the entire box set that the dogs are different from Brodies. But like, it goes back to being Rottweiler. I don't know why there's German Shepherd's here. It's cute. Regardless, this is so bad. Like, man, this film has the exact same problems like almost every other remake has, where it has no idea what was so good about the original and what it had going for it. It's a profitable movie. Let's redo it because it's popular, and we don't understand why it's popular. It's a 2 out of 10. It's a 2 out of 10. I don't ever want to watch this again. It is a 2 out of 10. So yeah, finally finished with this set. I've seen them all now, and if I never watch another Omen movie, I would kind of be completely okay with that. I'd rewatch the original at some point in time probably, but the rest could definitely go away. I have no interest in revisiting them, and if it wasn't for the fact that this set has them all, I would honestly only keep the original film and get rid of the rest. It's interesting that Omen 2 and 3 try to do real sequel things and continue the story onward, but it's just not needed, and man, that remake sucked. What a slog to get through after like 5 hours of Omen movies. I'm glad this one's done. Oh boy. Bye!